place is nowhere. And it's forever.
Ghosts of my life.
It's another ambient artist again this week with Marlowe and Steven.
Well, this is Lost Futures, a Mark Fisher podcast, and I'm Steven, and
I'm Marlowe.
As he just said, and we are going over 2 essays in the book about the artist John Foxx, our favorite religious scholar from...
Our favorite Protestant polemic who taught an entire nation to hate the Catholics.
Yes, John Foxx. No, not that John Foxx.
The ambient artist, John Foxx.
John Foxx, he made this album in 2006 called Tiny Color Movies, and this essay is called Old Sunlight from Other Times and Other Lives. John Foxx's Tiny Color Movies. And it's originally a K-Punk article from June 19th, 2006. Shortly after the album came out. And we'll just jump right into it. Marlowe loved the album.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I kind of liked his music overall. If I find the person from these essays to be a bit comedically pretentious. But no, I mean, like, whatever. As far as, like, when I think of, like, ambient-y music... I mean, yeah, it kind of has that somewhat Aphex Twin sound to it in some parts. In other parts, it's just a melancholic piano, which is also like another type of Aphex Twin. So it kind of reminds me of Aphex Twin.
Well, the song we were just listening to, Kurfürstendamm, reminds me of Kraftwerk, Neu, and... some, krautrocky kind of stuff. But You're right, like his more synthy stuff is extremely...
Yeah, it's got a lot of, that, like, Kraftwerky shit, too. Anyway, to start off, Fisher hones in on the obvious thing with Tiny Color Movies, which is... the relationship between the visual and the sonic is an explicit motivating factor. To quote
wait. We didn't. I always skip over it too, but the little passage he gives.
He gives a passage in the beginning from a book that John Foxx has spent 30 goddamn years of his life writing.
He was in the market crowds wearing a shabby brown suit, trying to find me through all the years. My ghost coming home. How do you get home through all the years? It goes on and on. But it's apparently...
is that from that one, or is that from... Because I think he quotes from 2 different works
of his. He quotes from 2 works, Quiet Man and Shifting City.
Yeah, so I was referring to Quiet Man.
Yeah, this is somebody else, so I think it's Shining City, maybe.
Yeah, so the premise of Quiet Man, which we watched a bit of John Foxx reading Quiet Man, which is a book that, per the interview, he has been continuously writing and
for his whole life, yeah.
It's basically, imagine if 28 Days Later was more boring and pretentious. The conceit is it's written as this, like, day in the life of a salaryman sort of idea of, like, Tom got up and fixed his coffee. He went to walk down to the market. He passed where Mrs. Weatherby lived. But then as the story goes on, you realize we're in a post-apocalyptic setting. As far as we know, Tom is or whatever the fuck the guy's name is the only individual human alive as far as we can tell. I mean, again, he's been writing it for 20 years. Maybe some crazy shit happened. So also,
but I think that's the premise.
Yeah, but that seems to, I mean, for all I know, like, maybe by now, like, the main character's, like, found a whole, like, group of people and they're having a ball. I don't know how it goes, but that's pretty much the conceit of the book. So you could kind of imagine that a lot of his stuff, he just kind of reminds me of the coolest collector of Chris Nolan posters that you bought weed from in college.
Well, okay, so a little background. Basically, the wiki of him is he's originally named Dennis Lee, and he was in the new wave band Ultravox.
Right, yeah.
Until he started his solo career with an album that Fisher talks about, Metamatic, which is, as we discussed, very Gary Newman-esque.
Yeah, that was the Gary Newman
if
album.
you know Gary Newman, Cars, Here in My Car, na. You know, it has a...
Our Friends Electric.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Those two songs that are made by Gary Newman.
Right. The two, if you don't know Gary Newman, he has two songs. Listen to them both. They're pretty good.
They're really good. And Metamatic has that, you know, detached kind of vocalist, even more detached than Gary Newman. And over the years, he's just become less and less of a frontman and more of this like artist that makes pictures with his music and ambient music. And that's sort of where Tiny Color Movies comes in, because he pairs it a lot with the visuals.
Right. And also, okay, so I kind of, maybe I didn't understand this from the interview part, but I think he also like put the actual Tiny picture like on film reel.
Well,
it's like
that was in the beginning of this. That's what we're getting to. The inspiration for the album was a film collection by Arnold Weitz Bryant. He collects only films that are short. They gave a showing of it in Baltimore where Fox attended it and was blown away so much that he made the album based on the memories of that. And then I think that he used those in
because he discusses, there's a part in the interview where he discusses that he's only been able to mostly show, quote, digital replica of the films because the actual films are like delicate and hard to ship around and stuff.
It's hard for them to get to England.
You know, it's treated as an art project. I mean, that's kind of like the physical medium he's also playing with. But anyway.
Very pretentious, but also inspiring.
Look, I'm not just getting on him. He's an artist.
It's kind of inspiring.
Yeah, sure. It's a perfectly cogent project a person can have.
Okay, so Fisher talks about how it's hauntological, right? That's the name of the book. That's the name of the chapter. Why is it hauntological?
And partially, I think he kind of... he's discussing in this context the sort of the musical genre side of hauntology and hauntological music.
Well, he says here, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say Fox's entire musical career has been about relating the hauntology of the visual with the hauntology of the sound, transposing the eerie calmness and stillness of photography and painting onto the passional agitation of rock. Mm-hmm. Good quote for this, and basically that's the only quote you probably could take away from this, although there are other good parts of it. But that's the theme, is that it's hauntological because it has these visuals that go with the music, and the music itself is trying to capture, this feeling of loss that he felt when looking at the visuals. Mm-hmm. And yeah, the visuals are, the Skyscraper one has this really... Skyscraper is another track from it that's my favorite, and it has like 1960s.
It looks like shit that was shot on a Super 8. It looks like home movies. If your grandparents had home movies or whatever, it looks like home movies of a skyscraper. And true to home movies, they didn't record sound, and you would often, when getting them developed, have a film track like just put on top of it. Or a soundtrack just put, on top of it. That was usually when you were playing it, you would have that. Do you see? Yeah, that kind of shit. So,
those are photographs, not films.
Yeah, well, those were slides, yeah. But, I mean, like, I actually, incidentally, over Christmas, my grandparents had a bunch of home movies they transferred to VHS in the 90s, so we were watching them. That was what I was really thinking, because then that was a whole thing, and they would always, like, put a fucking soundtrack on top of it, so it was just burr, 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 and, like, 8-second clips of, like, several different really Italian weddings from the 1960s.
Yeah, for those listening in the future, possibly in not a time that is now, we're recording this in January after a long break for Christmas and New Year's and stuff like that. So Marlowe went and saw some home movies.
Yeah, it had a similar, there's a film grain to it that's, like, very important. It's, also done mostly in these very short couple minutes at most long clips before a cut, of, like, riding in a car on a street or just
Did you feel like there was a certain hauntological...
panning around. Yeah, I mean... Even the car and shit, like, stuff looked older. I mean, it was definitely a anachronism that he's playing around with. And, I mean, they mention Warhol, and the skyscraper one particularly is kind of evocative of Empire. Was it just called Empire? The Warhol movie where he just filmed the Empire State Building for 24 hours or whatever the fuck.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't that. Like, I mean, it was not just the still camera on a fixed point. It was panning around and stuff. And there were several cuts.
Yeah.
But, it was a skyscraper on film. It kind of reminded me of Warhol's thing.
Well, speaking of skyscraper, here he says that it sounds like something out of Blade Runner's soundtrack. Mm-hmm. Which sure. I can hear, yeah.
Was that Eno?
Well, it says Vangelis.
Oh, okay.
He says it there. Vangelis' Blade Runner soundtrack.
Okay. Guess I was thinking of Dune. the 80s one.
Yeah.
And Brian Eno.
So, yeah, there's another quote, which I think that's the one from Quiet Man, I think. I constantly feel a distant kind of longing. The longest song, the song of longing. I walk the same streets like a fading ghost, flickering gray suit, the same avenues, squares, parks, colonnades like a ghost. Over the years, I find places I can go through.
The part we were listening to, it was third person, so I'm just kind of... Maybe it's an internal monologue of his, or...
Yeah, it's unclear what all these quotes are.
Yeah, like from. At the end, Mark Fisher just like notes that the quotes all came from like one of two writings.
That's one thing I find frustrating in general about Zero books. Like Capitalist Realism does this too, where they don't have
Zero books likes not citing things or
at all.
Like, and then like everyone's like, hey, Kill All Normies sounded like a bunch of stuff the author just literally made up, and they're like, look, we don't work within your scholarly definitions of juridicalness, and you're like, okay, fine, guys.
Yeah.
That's what you get with many crit theory labels.
He links it back to Ultravox, the old band of John Foxx's Systems of Romance album, which has a bunch of songs that are similarly evocative of this longing, of this amnesic catatonia. And that it's trance-like, and it's got gentle, blissful sounds that are also at the same time impersonal or machinic. I mean, I appreciate that description because it kind of does perfectly encapsulate that type of Gary Newman thing where it's both evocative and passionate, but also dispassionate and impersonal, like alien almost.
You're like, our friends, why that's personable, electric, ooh.
Yeah.
That's machinic. it's the duality.
Yeah.
Friends and electric.
And then he says it's psychedelic, or psychedelia is kind of part of this. He says, in becoming, rather than a plodding reiteration, like psychedelia, capturing the psychedelic experience of living life. And, you know, he then goes on and compares it to a bunch of artists, H.G. Wells,
None of whom are Gary Newman, unfortunately.
Delvaux, and Max Ernst, the painter,
Okay.
who was like a surrealist.
Mm-hmm.
And he then compares that to J.G. Ballard, which we looked up. J.G. Ballard being like a fiction writer known for his futuristic science fiction. Kind of like Philip K. Dick or William Burroughs.
It looked like he was kind of a generation after Dick. Like, I mean, he existed at the same time, but it was like Dick was from a slightly earlier
like
generation.
right after the war, right? Because it was.
Yeah.
And Mark Fisher has that whole thesis book is a lot of Ballard,
Right.
and a lot of Dick.
Flatlines.
Yeah.
Flatline Constructs, another book of Fisher's. Yeah, we'll get to it eventually. I don't fucking know. This college thesis, it's actually pretty hard.
Yeah,
It's actually like somewhat difficult.
it's a very dense book.
Yeah.
And he compares it to a surrealist painting. Ballard wrote a 1966 essay, which we read, Coming of the Unconscious, which he quotes here, how a surrealistic painting has one dominant characteristic, a glassy isolation, as if all the objects in its landscapes had been drained of their emotional associations, the accretion of sentiment and common usage. Basically, so through surrealism, you kind of create a meaning that you're adding to the object that is being made surreal, and then everything else becomes kind of like flattened by that, which I think is pretty cool. I mean, that's sort of, you know, being on an acid trip.
Yeah.
Like something is not quite
Right,
correct.
and like extra significant to objects and searching for this meta meaning. Yeah, anyway, so then he gets into the whole gnosis and Gnostic thing, which, I mean, this other shit, I was kind of dancing around it as well, this whole idea. Yeah, I mean, Fisher gets into this, Fox talks about it in the interview, of this idea of the angel and the angelic and like sort of the, you know, within Gnostic philosophy, the idea of like the revealed immaterial truth of the world as it gets peeled away. And like, you know, relating to, you know, the real in Lacan and ego death and LSD trips. Like just the general like almost terrifying experience that such perfect serenity holds to the viewer.
That it's more fearful to meet the angel, right?
Right, yeah.
Than
So
the
he
demon.
gets into Rudolf Otto, who was a conservative theologian who had this concept or this quote or something. Basically, it is actually more terrifying for man to meet the angel than the demon. Sort of, you know, this idea that there's, you know, something familiar about the demonic because it is ugly and of this world, whereas the angel is something so perfect as to be beyond comprehension.
This is the second time he's mentioned Gnosticism. He mentioned it in the David Peace.
Yeah, so with the
essay.
peace thing, he has this quote, what is suppressed in postmodern culture is not the dark but the light side.
Which is an awesome quote.
We are more comfortable with demons than angels. The demonic appears cool and sexy. The angelic is deemed embarrassing and sentimental. You know, interesting, I would say the peace thing is, you know, the way he used gnosis there was saying it actually concentrated on the demonic. Mm-hmm. The peace, to the extent that peace was Gnostic, it was Gnostic in the sense of decrying the material world.
Right, and that it was kind of getting at the real by
whereas this is more trying to present the immaterial transcendent.
Well, and that was what was sort of confusing for me, or at least seemed contradictory, was the way it was used with David Peace was, you know, the way to get to the real is to depict it as darkly and as lacking as much sentimentality as possible.
Yeah, I mean, that was also, I mean, if I'm recalling correctly, there was something of like, depressive epistemology being discussed with the David Peace thing, which is, so when you're saying the real, you mean like the truth.
Yeah,
essentially, not the
depressing reality of the
right.
70s, which during that was like,
yeah, I just used the real and the like Lacan, so I was just kind of
what I was, with Life on Mars. Life on Mars gave us a rosy, sentimental version of the 70s.
Pop culture signifier filled.
Right. And then David Peace gave us the gritty, real 70s. Mm-hmm. I'm using in air quotes.
So in the case of Peace, I would say that, at least by this definition, Peace is the postmodernist in many ways. Frankly, embarrassing and sentimental sound like words Fisher would have used to describe life on Mars.
Yeah.
So maybe Fisher's got some postmodernism.
That's sort of the tension with these two and for the listener, I just wrote an article about Gnosticism and hauntology, and there was this tension between, does hauntology prioritize the light or the dark? And what is the approach at getting to truth by hauntology? Do you get to truth, or are you constantly deferring the truth because it's in the crackle, it's in the in-between space of the past and the future, and so you're trying to capture this in-between in the present? And it doesn't seem entirely clear to me whether or not this Gnosticism has, as he says here, is it suppressing the light side, or is it engaging in the gritty darkness?
Right. And in this case, I think it's fairly unambiguous. He feels that Fox is engaging with the light side, right. Very much so, but he's
railing against postmodern culture.
Right. No, that's my point. Whereas Peace, in my comparison of the two uses of Gnostic, seems to actually be doing postmodernism. At least by this rubric, or at the very least, Gnostic in this case, I feel like is used in a somewhat more traditional sense of actually seeking transcendence, whereas Gnostic in the Peace case was used very much, in my mind, as a way of saying, I have a pessimistic view of the world.
Which I don't think he's doing here.
No.
He's
very much saying it's Gnostic because it's actually toying with the idea of transcending over reality, not just railing against the fact that the world sucks, but overcoming and transcending that to the actual real.
Right.
That you get from experiences with angels and LSD trips.
It's very interesting. It's very interesting that he uses it here, and it's very interesting how it weaves into his argument, because then we listened to the panel discussion, and there was a guy who identified as a Gnostic, and he also saw hauntology as being this...
Mid-2000s British academics were so fucking cool. Academics and culture writers.
Yeah, and his whole thing with it was that he saw hauntological music as, in the Gnostic tradition, trying to bring about magic in the world.
Yeah, it was super fucking interesting.
And so, in some ways, we're going to get into this, but, there is a bit of that here with the numinous and the way Otto is describing it.
Yeah, no, he's basically saying the music is trying to invoke God, but, in all the terrifying aspects that meeting God would have.
Numinous is the interface with God.
Right.
We looked that up. Interface with God, which I am sort of relating to, if you close your eyes and you pray, and you're interfacing with God.
When you were a child and stupid.
Yeah, when you believed in Santa Claus.
This is now a skeptic chat with Marlowe and Steven. We're taking down your
God.
Sky Man.
Yeah.
Your invisible Sky Man, you dumb idiots. Nah. Which I always, in my, vague amateur studies of Christian theology, I always kind of associated that action with how the Holy Spirit was described.
Yeah.
Your kind of ethereal, unspeakable mystical connection to God, for as much as that exists in Western Protestantism.
He makes the distinction that it's not New Age.
Uh-huh.
This is not an inner but outer calm, not a discovery of the cheap New Age real self, but a positive alienation in which the cold pastoral freezing into a tableau is experienced as a release from identity.
Yeah.
And this is where he gets into like Harold Budd, who's a prolific ambient artist who makes 3 notes on the piano and turns it into 20-minute songs.
You would not think that he could play so few notes in such a long song.
No, I want to say, like, John Foxx did a couple albums.
1/2 beat per minute.
Yeah, John Foxx did a couple albums with Harold Budd, and I've seen Harold Budd in concert when I was on an acid trip, and it was phenomenal.
Oh, yeah, sure. If you
phenomenal.
Forget how long you've been standing there, it's great.
Well, we were seated. Yeah. We were in a nice, cushy seats. It was very nice. It was on the come down, too. It was great. So, yeah. Then he gets into Deleuze and Guattari and Hayosity, which Marlowe has a whole thing about Hayosity.
Hayosity is how something relates to the song Hey Ya by Outkast. And to highlight that this is actually the real definition of Hayosity. What page are we on?
We're on 156.
Oh, yeah, there it is. Oh, yeah.
A certain use of film, think particularly of the aching stillness in Kubrick and Tarkovsky, seems especially set up to attune us to Hayosity, as does the Polaroid.
Exactly.
A capturing of a Hayosity, which is itself a Hayosity.
Right, so, because the Polaroids are in the Hayos song.
Shake it like a Polaroid.
Hayosity. Okay, so what does Hayosity actually mean?
Hayosity means...
Oh, it's Duns Scotus's concept of the Hayosity, the
here
quote,
and now.
Here and now.
Yeah, it's about identity.
Okay, because, you're here and now.
Virtue and, like, you're cognizant of time.
Mm-hmm.
And he relates this to Deleuze and Guattari's second book on schizophrenia and capital, 1,000 Plateaus, which came out in 1980 and is the follow-up to Anti-Oedipus.
Right.
In which they say, it's a depersonalized mode of individuation in which everything, the breath of the wind, the quality of the light, plays a part. And so, it's basically we're in ourselves. Which always came across to me as like maybe a little egotistical, but maybe that's the New Age thing and they're distinguishing that from the New Age thing.
Anyway.
Now I'm just thinking of John Foxx doing a really slowed down version of Hey Ya and putting it over Polaroid.
No, we already did that in the 2000s.
Doing and over Polaroid pictures?
Oh, no, I'm just saying we already had white people doing Hey Ya slower.
Oh, yeah.
That was already a fad.
I definitely did.
Yeah. It's a great song to sing like a tragic acoustic ballad because it lyrically is. But anyway, that's not Hayosity.
Here or now.
That's neither here nor now.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm learning. Yeah, anyway, it compares the time and color movies to sort of found art, which is, I guess if we're getting into like everything we've learned about ontology so far, this sort of ethereal quality of this film looks like it belongs to a different context, like it was found and taken out of it and put somewhere else in a certain way. And in fact, it was produced for this art project, but it kind of gives that impression. So
then he brings up the Quiet Man.
Yep.
Which we've already pontificated about. Marlowe's favorite, 28 Days Later, but more pretentiousness.
Yeah.
Here you see sunlight from other times and other lives. That's where the title.
He gets into it in the interview that he just specifically really likes the imagery of plants growing in an abandoned urban environment.
Yeah.
That's just they grow up. I don't think we're going to go into the entire interview on its own. So, I'll just, as an aside, he grew up in a factory town. How the British pronounce it is different than how people from South Jersey pronounce Lancaster or Lancastershire.
Lancastershire.
Yeah, well, anyway, Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, England, where there used to be a lot of factories, blah, 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 blah. So him and his friends used to play in abandoned factories, which were these amazing, huge indoor warehousey spaces, and there were literal trees growing in what was the factory floor and stuff, and he always was in there, kind of in that space, thinking about the ghosts, thinking about what it was like when this factory was actually a functional thing. But, throughout his work, he likes the imagery of specifically a post-apocalyptic urban space, and not even just like a bombed out one, but like one where plants have overgrown shit. Like, it's just a very thing that he likes that you get from the interview, that and then it's like, yeah, this pops up in his work a lot. It's like, okay.
Well, yeah, we're not going to go over the full interview. We're just going to focus on this essay. And I like that. I like that too.
No.
I mean,
cool
abandoned
imagery.
Buildings, going into abandoned hospitals are fascinating.
Yeah, there's some chronological about it, but also it's kind of cool. And he thinks it's cool and he uses it a bunch. And I can appreciate that. Oh no, we got Tarkovsky's Stalker, more Otto.
I like this line. It is as if we are seeing the urgencies of our lives through the eyes of an alien god. And then he goes into Otto again. Otto claims that the sense of the numinous is associated with feelings of our own fundamental worthlessness, experienced with a piercing acuteness and accompanied by the most uncompromising judgment of self-depreciation. But contrary to today's ego psychology, which hectors us into reinforcing our sense of self all the better to sell ourselves, the awareness of our own nothingness is, of course, a prerequisite for a feeling of grace.
Yeah, Mark, that's great. Yeah, Mark Fisher. Actually, the stuff that says you're a piece of shit is good.
Yeah.
Fisher. Actually, Actually, I'm the normal one, and you're not depressed enough.
Actually, you should read the comments on YouTube so that you get the full appreciation of your nothingness. Then there's another quote. I think it's The Quiet Man because it's third person, right?
Yeah.
He stood in the soft beams of sunshine diffused by the curtains, caught for a moment in the stillness of the room, watching the dust swirling slowly golden through patches of light that fell across the carpets and furniture, feeling a strange closeness to the vanished woman. Being here and touching her possessions in the dusty intimacy of these rooms was like walking through her life. Everything of her was here, but for the physical presence, and in some ways that was the least important part of her for him. He links it to Lacan here. Like, he links the blurred girl from Metamatic to Lacan.
Yeah.
And how the lover is always going to be perfect but out of reach. The kind of desire object of the woman is, constantly deferred. And it does remind me of Derrida's Différance as well. The deferral of meaning is always the difference between things. And yeah, there's an enjoyable melancholy about the whole thing. That's, the melancholiness comes from the distance. The melancholy comes from the longing.
Oh, that was my thing. Standing close, never quite touching, like the Matrix. The new Matrix.
Oh, yeah, you were going to say. If you've seen the rebooted Matrix, which, by the way, was a good...
Yeah, no, absolutely the best Matrix since the first Matrix. It's the newest Matrix. But, yeah, no, it just, sort of highlighted... There's a central plot point in the new Matrix where these dissident robots or some shit, I forget the exact shit, but basically they made a new Matrix. As you do. And the robots figured out they could create all the power.
Well, they made a new Matrix, the movie, but they also made a new Matrix in the Matrix.
In the new Matrix, they made a new Matrix. And the robot who made the new Matrix figured out that for whatever reason, the best way to generate power is to have Neo and Trinity be in the Matrix together, always sort of happenstance having like a rom-com introduction, but never getting the rest of the rom-com movie. Just giving them rom-com blue balls, like, produces the most power, which I would say is the almost perfect Lacanian love movie.
Well, you should write an article about Lacan and the new Matrix.
So, Mark Fisher made me realize the new Matrix is a Lacanian love story. Except then they get the object petite. So it's like a Lacanian love story if the Wachowskis made it. Heyo. Wachowskis are bad at philosophy. Heyo. But anyway,
Then there's another quote. I can detect tiny edges of time leaking through. I feel nothing is completely separate. At some point, everything leaks into everything else. The trick is in finding the places. They're slowly moving, drifting. You can only do this accidentally. If you set out to do it deliberately, you will always fail. See, there's a... It is only when you remember, only then will you realize that you caught a glimpse while you were talking to someone or thinking of something else, when your attention was diverted, just a hint, a glimmer, a shade. Much later you will remember, without really knowing why. Vague peripheral sensations gather. Some fraction of a long rhythm is beginning to be recognized. The hidden frequencies and tides of the city. Geometry of coincidence. Yeah, I mean, do you want to talk a little bit about, in the interview, because I think we're coming up to the end on this, but he does say some things that...
Yeah, I mean, we covered some points that I thought, related pretty well to this. I mean, getting back into, kind of reminds me of that guy in college with the Reservoir Dog movie poster.
Yeah.
He starts out, and it's, almost hard to judge, because it's this was 15 or whatever years ago. It's almost 20 years ago. They didn't realize this sounded cringe then. But, yeah, he has a, long aside about how he loves, fucking Ed Wood movies and, old B movies because he's so wacky and different. And actually, in many ways, Ed Wood achieved what the avant-garde is only approaching now, which is really funny to read.
My favorite one was when he said Planet of the Apes and the Statue of Liberty at the end was a modern take on Shelley's Ozymandias.
Sure, man. I mean, okay, number one, it's entirely possible someone did have that thought when writing that scene. I mean, I have no fucking idea personally, but it's not that's that deep.
I mean, I love Shelley's Ozymandias.
Yeah, also Ozymandias from The Watchmen is a reference to Shelley's Ozymandias, but it's not that deep of a cut. Yeah, I guess. Why the fuck not? They're exactly the same thing, really, if you think about it. One's a cool as shit epic poem, and the other's kind of a shitty but fun, goofy 70s movie.
The other thing that I thought was interesting is he does see himself in relation to New Age with this angelicness.
He does seem to
reject New Age.
Well, yeah, and also think it's really important that that he's trying to find the self, but not those douchebags do it.
Yeah,
is kind of his thing.
That's not me. That's somebody else.
Yeah, no, mine's the good one that isn't super cringe.
But also, as we just highlighted...
I mean, I can tell you that, Seinfeld referenced Plan 9 from Outer Space 10 fucking years before this shit came out, so he didn't totally invent that idea of irony watching shitty movies.
Yeah, his music is better than he comes off in the interview, I'll say that.
Yeah, I mean, he does sound like a sort of guy who would make that music. I just happen to kind of like it. It's just not that bad. But like we said, he gets into the fucking angelic stuff. He gets into how he likes urban post-apocalyptic imagery, and that whole bit about him growing up in the dying factory town of Lancaster. Yeah, is interested in this, like, sort of... Does he ever use the word Gnostic? I don't know that he does.
No, he doesn't.
Yeah, he does not.
He does not. That's Mark Fisher's, like...
But he does use the word angelic quite a bit.
Yeah.
So that's his whole thing. Again, not like how the New Age people do it, though. Yeah.
I think I told you this before, but the listener hasn't heard this before. I got arrested for breaking into an abandoned building.
Oh, yeah.
Those early days, and I found this hospital that had all of its records intact in cardboard boxes, and it had been abandoned because of asbestos. And we would go in. It was like along this trail. We'd go run through the trail and then break into one of the doors, and we'd go through, and you'd see these Polaroids of the patients that were there, because it was like a psych ward. And then in a closet, they had these piles of, all the records dating back to the 70s, and you could go through, like, this person is diagnosed with this person escaped from the hospital. You'd see all these kind of, like, signifiers of what once was, like, the skid marks from the wheelchairs and basically just looks like people didn't even have time to put stuff away when they abandoned it. And I always think of that place, and yeah, one time I went, I kept going back and back because it was so fascinating.
Was this high school or?
I got arrested sophomore year of college.
Oh, okay.
And my friend and I, we threw a rock through the window because they figured out that people were breaking in, so they locked all the doors that we had been going in, so I threw a rock in the window, and then my friend went through the window, and then the cop came around and arrested me and then picked him up when he left.
Yeah.
So that was my childhood abandoned buildings phase. I still think about that place because there was just so many interesting things that are extremely hauntological about it. It was like a psych ward. It was they had an outpatient program, and you could figure out these people's lives.
Yeah, no, it sounded like a lot of information that you shouldn't have had access to. Yeah, I'm with you, man.
Anyways.
Like they're ghosts, except they're real people.
You had your grandparents' film set.
That was, consensually made to be shown to others. Whereas, psych ward hospital records are the other thing. But, yeah, that's fun.
Well, next week we're going to have...
Yeah, next week, we're ending the Hauntology chapter 01 or whatever, 02. We're ending this one on a fucking banger.
Yep. I'm so excited for this.
We shouldn't say anything.
No?
Let's just say, R.I.P. Mark Fisher. You would have loved how this all turned out.
Let's just say you're going to think differently about 808 and the Heartbreak.
Yeah, anyway.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.